I'm Tracy Sable. Tonight on EWTN News Nightly, another round. President Joe Biden announces his re-election campaign. We're at the White House. A trial of peace. Sudan announces its third attempt at a ceasefire after 48 hours of negotiations. A month of hope. We learn about a group that works year-round to spread support to vulnerable children. And back to Budapest. We prepare for Pope Francis's upcoming trip to Hungary with a report from the Vatican. These stories and more tonight.
From EWTN, the Global Catholic Network, this is EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you for being with us on the feast of St. Mark the Evangelist. Our top story tonight, President Joe Biden wants voters to give him a second term. He has confirmed that he is running for re-election, even though recent polls show a majority of Americans, including Democrats, don't want him to. Add one of the top issues at stake is abortion. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, good evening to you. Tonight, pro-life Republicans are pushing back against President Biden's pro-abortion agenda. One Republican presidential candidate today told an audience she's trying to save as many lives and help as many moms as possible. Putting any doubts to rest on whether he's running, President Joe Biden releases a 3-minute video. His formal campaign begins today. He says he needs another 4 years in office to complete the job.
When I ran for president 4 years ago, I said we're in a battle for the soul of America, and we still are.
Early on in the video, the president warns of who he calls mega extremists and what they're doing.
Dictating what health care decisions women can make, banning books, and telling people who they can love, all while making it more difficult for you to be able to vote.
But Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley defends life. She spoke today at SBA Pro-Life America's headquarters in Virginia.
I believe every life is a blessing from God. My heart hurts when someone decides not to go through with a pregnancy.
The former governor and ambassador said she wants to move America more towards life, adding that will take consensus, while emphasizing humanizing over demonizing each other.
I do believe there is a federal role on abortion. Whether we can save more lives nationally depends entirely on doing what no one else has done to date, and that is to find consensus.
But the Biden administration continues to go against Catholic Church teaching, which mandates protecting the unborn. Vice President Kamala Harris has been hitting the road discussing what the administration calls reproductive rights tonight at Howard University. President Biden's re-election bid is also blasted by the GOP. The Republican Party quickly released this rebuttal.
Who's in charge here? It feels like the train is coming off the tracks.
As for President Biden, he's immediately appealing to his base, speaking today at a conference in Washington, D.C. for North America's building trades unions.
Now we've just got to keep it going, finish the job. We just have to remember who we are. We are the United States of America.
Now, back to the race for the White House in 2024. President Biden does face some competition from within his own party, including candidates like Robert F. Kennedy Jr. And meanwhile, the Republican Party field is growing as well in the race for president, led by, of course, former President Donald Trump. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Well, it is a big week for House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and Republicans as they try to pass their plan to lift the debt ceiling. The speaker claims that his $4.5 trillion plan will cut government spending and set the U.S. on the road to economic stability. The question, though, does he have the votes? Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales has the latest.
It really is all about the math. Speaker McCarthy can only lose 5 Republicans in order to pass the legislation without any Democrat support. His plan to hike the debt ceiling $1.5 trillion, but shave $4.5 trillion in spending over a decade. Bottom line, Speaker McCarthy says President Biden and Senate Democrats have to make budget cuts.
And our government is designed to find compromise. That's why the House, the Senate, and the White House should be negotiating a responsible debt limit increase right now.
But many Democrats say budget cuts are off the table and accuse Republicans of making default more likely.
It is almost cataclysmic if we were to default. And even to have the brinksmanship that brings us to the verge of that is so dangerous for our economy.
The Treasury Department estimates that Congress has until midsummer to raise the debt ceiling and avoid a default. But West Virginia Democratic Senator Joe Manchin praised the Speaker's efforts, saying in a statement, quote, "I urge President Biden to come to the table, propose a plan for real substantive spending cuts, and negotiate now. Failing to do so may score political points with the extremes of the Democratic Party, but make no mistake, it will be the American people and our nation who will pay the ultimate price." Other Republicans tell me they don't trust the Democrats.
They have no intentions of cutting this budget. They have no intentions of helping the American taxpayers. All they want to do is keep power and just give out meal tickets to people so they'll vote for them.
Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace says both sides are at fault.
And I just don't understand why we can't have a conversation about how we're going to cut spending, like really cut spending, or balance the budget over the next decade or so and show the American people we're going to be responsible with their tax dollars.
Speaker McCarthy is confident that the bill will pass when it hits the floor later this week, but it must first pass a Rules Committee later tonight. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
A 3-day ceasefire has begun in Sudan. This as several countries, including the United States, has removed diplomatic personnel from the African nation. British and Irish citizens arrived late yesterday in an airport on the Horn of Africa, but thousands of others remain in Sudan. More than 400 people have been killed in the fighting, with around 3,000 others wounded. The truce comes after 48 hours of negotiations. We go now to Brett Bruen, president of the Global Situation Room. Brett, great to be with you today. This situation in Sudan is being described as unpredictable and volatile, and now the World Health Organization is saying that there is a huge biological risk as one of the warring sides has now occupied a laboratory that contains samples of diseases like measles. Brett, what are we looking at right now, and how potentially dangerous could this get?
Well, I think the answer is it could get a lot more dangerous. This is a very volatile region. But on top of that, as you cite, the WHO has come out naming this lab as one of the areas, there potentially are others, that has been captured by these rebellious factions. And that obviously poses a whole lot of risks. And the trafficking, Tracy, in those kinds of biological agents can fetch enormous prices on the international market. That's a real concern for leaders in Washington.
Yes, so concerning. And we also know that U.S. Special Forces helped to evacuate the U.S. Embassy over the weekend and bring diplomats home. But, Brad, there are still about 16,000 U.S. citizens still in Sudan, many dual nationals. What of them? And what's being done to bring them to safety?
Well, Tracy, this is part of a pattern that we've seen, whether it was in Afghanistan, also in the run-up to the war in Ukraine, where the Biden administration has somewhat detached themselves from the sense of responsibility for getting all Americans out, or at least as when I was a diplomat in the Foreign Service, we made every effort to get diplomats out. So this is concerning that we did only pull out those official Americans, because there are thousands of Americans, as you mentioned, who are left behind. And while, yes, some may have family ties or personal ties, there are a lot who are simply aid workers, who are missionaries, who are doing other important humanitarian support for the country, and we gave them no notice. Yes, the White House will say there was a general warning of do not travel, but we have that on lots of countries. We've got to go back and get them.
Yeah, and other countries like France, I know, they're pulling their citizens out of Sudan. So why is the U.S. not doing the same, Brett?
I think the short answer is politics. After the attack on our consulate in Benghazi, Libya, we've just been a lot more risk averse. And so both the Trump administration, but also the Biden administration, have not wanted to take the kind of risks that we used to. I did an evacuation of Americans in 2004 in Abidjan, Ivory Coast. The conditions there was open fighting in the streets. There were 10,000 or tens of thousands of protesters. It wasn't a permissive environment, and yet we went in, We got people out because that is what in the diplomatic service we were trained to do.
So what do you think the U.S. and the international community should do right now, what we're seeing play out in Sudan? How should they get more involved?
Well, the first thing is we obviously do have leverage. This 72-hour ceasefire that was negotiated both by the U.S. as well as other international partners shows that we can impose, to a certain extent, the international community's will. We ought to do that to try and get more civilians, certainly our citizens, to safety, because it's in nobody's interest, neither the Sudanese army nor the rapid security forces, to be in a situation where foreign civilians are killed. Obviously, we want to prevent any kind of human life, but I think we impress upon them the importance of preserving human life and certainly giving us a chance to get as many civilians out of harm's way as possible.
Brett, we have about 30 seconds left or so. Final thoughts.
I think we have to continue to press both in Congress as well as on the administration side to do more, to get back in there and to get our people out so that we avoid another potential humanitarian tragedy.
Brett, thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it. Always appreciate your insights. Thanks again. Well, the president of Guatemala was welcomed in Taiwan today by President Tsai Ing-wen.
En especial en la cooperación en áreas como salud, economía, comercio e infraestructura básica.
During his official visit, Guatemala's President Alejandro Giammattei asked other governments to respect Taiwan's sovereignty. His remarks come as China steps up its efforts to isolate the self-ruled island. China says that it will unite Taiwan to its mainland by force if necessary. Protesters in Paris voiced their frustrations on Monday against French President Emmanuel Macron's pension reforms. President Macron's government passed legislation last month that raised the retirement age in France from 62 to 64. Macron has claimed that this was a necessary step to save France's pension system. Opponents of the legislation argue that the wealthy should pitch in more instead. And we have a lot more still to come here on EWTN News Nightly, including spreading hope. We learn about an organization reaching out to vulnerable children and their families. And one of the 12, Pope Francis appoints a new bishop to a diocese in central Pennsylvania. The governor of North Dakota signs a bill banning nearly all abortions. Governor Doug Burgum says the measure refines and reaffirms North Dakota as a pro-life state. The new law, which is one of the strictest abortion bans in the U.S., is set to go into effect immediately. Well, April is National Month of Hope, which is all about celebrating the belief that things will work out in the end. One Catholic organization is working to bring hope to vulnerable children and their families around the world. Changing the Way We Care is a global initiative by Catholic Relief Services and Mestral International. The group works with partners around the world to empower families to care for their own children. The organization is currently active in India, Kenya, Moldova, and Guatemala. And joining me now is Erica Dahl-Bredine, Director for Global Influence, Learning, and Engagement for Changing the Way We Care. Erica, great to be with you today. You know, it may be a surprise to some to learn that there are a number of children in orphanages that actually have at least one living parent. Tell us more about this, and what are some of the ways that parents and children become separated? What happens?
Yeah, thanks so much for this opportunity. And I think National Month of Hope is the perfect time to be talking about this issue. What many Americans and others don't realize, as you say, is that there are millions of children around the world living in orphanages, what we prefer to call residential care facilities, who aren't actually orphans. 8 out of every 10 children, according to the research in orphanages, have one living parent. And the vast majority of the other children have extended family members, relatives who could potentially bring them in and care for them if they had the right kind of support. The reasons that so many children are placed in orphanages or residential care facilities, even though they have a parent, is poverty, is because often families simply can't provide the basic needs for their children: food, clothing, access to education, and other issues such as violence, war, disease like COVID, HIV, AIDS, and so on. But we know, the research says, decades of research say, that children fare far better in life at every level if they're raised in a family, in a safe and nurturing family, rather than in an institutional setting.
And Erica, talk to us about, maybe the challenges in reconnecting children with their families.
Yes, it's not an overnight process by any means. The good news is there are many organizations out there, faith-based and secular, like Changing the Way We Care, that are working to support and empower families and communities so that children can be reunited from residential care facilities back into their families, and also to prevent more children ultimately from being placed in orphanages. And we do that in a variety of ways. We're working very closely with many orphanages in those countries that you mentioned, for example, helping them to gradually reunify children with their families. That means taking the time to try to trace those families, to do extensive case management with those families to make sure that the environments are safe and nurturing and ultimately are in the best interests of those children. And then after reunifying them, to gradually begin transforming their institutions away from providing residential care and turning themselves into essentially family support and community centers. And so that can involve providing services to children with disabilities, which is another big group of children that are represented in orphanages. It means helping families connect up to social services, helping them get positive parenting programs, occasionally small business loans and business advice. Various types of support, sometimes facilitating access to educational scholarships so that children can go to school and still live at home. All of those are ways that families ultimately can be strengthened and can keep their children with them.
And Erica, what can we do to help out with all of this?
Yeah, well, I'm really personally humbled by the millions of Americans, people of faith, who contribute so generously their time and their talents and treasure to support orphanages. And so what we're saying is, not to stop supporting orphanages, but rather to use that influence that people have with the orphanages they support to encourage them to begin reunifying children with their families where they are able, and to gradually consider transforming into centers that can support families to be successful. And those organizations need financial support to do that. So we can all continue to fund those organizations, but really by trying to influence them to support and prioritize family care over residential care, over orphanages.
Erica, thank you so much for coming on and sharing all this with us. We really appreciate it, and thank you for what you do. God bless you.
Thank you so much.
Up next on EWTN News Nightly, papal visit. We follow the Pope's plans to Hungary this weekend with a report from the Vatican. Plus, a new bishop. We honor a recent appointment to the Harrisburg Diocese. Pope Francis has appointed a new bishop for the Diocese of Harrisburg. Bishop Timothy C. Sr. now serves about 200,000 Catholics in the central Pennsylvania diocese. In a statement, the bishop thanked Pope Francis for his confidence and trust. The bishop has served as an auxiliary bishop of Philadelphia since 2009. The Hungarian Ambassador to the Holy See recently spoke to EWTN Vatican Bureau Chief Andreas Thonhauser about the Holy Father's 3-day trip. He says Pope Francis will most likely renew his call for peace in the majority Catholic country.
We're here in Rome, right in front of St. Peter's, and we're joined by His Excellency, Ambassador to the Holy See, Eduard Habsburg. He's the Ambassador to the Holy See for Hungary. Thank you so much for being with us. And we know that the Pope shortly will be traveling to Hungary again in a very short time. Why is that?
Of course, I want to believe that he does it because he loves the Hungarians so much. But I think he had a very good impression when he came 2 years ago for short 7 hours at our Eucharistic Congress. The Hungarians must have left a lasting impression on him. Finally, I think that we have many topics in common. The Pope feels that in many sectors of today's world, you can have a dialogue with Hungary. So I'm looking forward to this visit and to his meetings with Hungarians, but also with our politicians.
What kind of church will the Holy Father find when he comes to Hungary?
Hungary likes to say we're a Christian nation. We're a Christian nation since 1,000 years. Hungary battles with all the secular problems that you have in the church everywhere in the world. But when the Pope came for the Eucharistic Congress, 300,000 Hungarians walked the streets of Budapest, walking behind the Blessed Sacrament. So it is really a Christian nation. He will find a nation that has a strong Catholic population, but also a strong and very visible Calvinist, Reformatus population, and also one of the most vibrant Jewish communities in Europe right now. So I'm sure it's going to be a very interesting visit.
Hungary is also a neighboring country to Ukraine, where a war is raging on European soil. What are you expecting of, what effect will the Pope's visit have also in this regard?
I'm pretty certain that the Pope will renew his call for peace, his call for immediate ceasefire, and he knows that Hungary is very close to him in this, because Hungary is also clearly asking for immediate ceasefire, peace negotiations, and the Pope knows that Viktor Orban, our Prime Minister, and he are very much on one line on this topic. So this is going to be a topic at the visit, I'm sure.
Allow me at the end also a personal question. I know that you're about to publish a new book. It's called The Habsburg Way, also in reference to the family that you're coming from. Just a few words to that book.
Thank you very much for asking. It's a fun little book that is not simply a history of the Habsburgs, but it's also trying to explain our 7 principal values and proposing them for the world of today that has perhaps gone lost a bit. And that's why I call it 7 Rules for Turbulent Times.
Eduard Habsburg, Ambassador to the Holy See for Hungary, thank you so much for your time.
A pleasure.
And we thank you for watching tonight. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Tracy Sable. Good night, and God bless.